And now, it's time for the Well-Read Llama with your host, author Erin Mifflin.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to summer. I've been on my summer break for about a week and a half, and it has been busy for us. We've already had family in town, and we've been working on rearranging our living space, and we're getting ready to go out of state to visit family ourselves. I've also really enjoyed the reading I've been doing recently, including the latest book from the author we're about to talk to. I got to read an early copy of it, and I thought it was great. I'm excited to interview this author and showcase yet another aspect of Christian fiction. We're talking to award-winning middle-grade author Anna Rose Johnson, who writes stories with a truly vintage feel. If you grew up reading Anne of Green Gables or the Betsy Tacy books, Anna Rose Johnson's style will resonate with you. Anna lives on a farm in Wisconsin, and we'll talk more about her family and interest. Before we begin, I'd be thrilled if you take a moment to follow me on Facebook or Instagram. You can keep up with all the latest from me, including which authors I'll be interviewing next. You can find me at author Erin Mifflin. Now, let's bring in our guest. Hello, Anna, and welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Your new book, The Blossoming Summer, releases next month. What can you tell us about this story?
Yeah, I am so excited for the release. Actually, the release was delayed somewhat. It's going to be coming out on July 29th now, so a little bit later than we thought, but I'm very excited about it. So basically, The Blossoming Summer is the story of 13-year-old Rosemary, who is evacuated from World War II London to her grandmother's home in America, in Wisconsin. And when they arrive, she uncovers the hidden family truth that they are of Ojibwe descent. And this discovery ends up leading her to embrace her heritage and forge new bonds and find beauty in unexpected places. So I'm excited about it.
Very good. So The Blossoming Summer is set during World War II, which I believe is a little bit later in history than your previous two releases. Do you have a favorite era to set your stories in?
Yeah, so my first two books were set in the 1910s, and so it was quite different to jump into that World War II setting. The 1910s is still my favorite era to write about, so moving into a different time period didn't really change that, but I did enjoy writing about the 1940s setting a lot. And I was able to include a lot of fun details, like about, radios, radio programs, and fashion things that didn't fit in my earlier settings. So that part was really, really quite fun. And one challenging aspect, I would say, was trying to settle on the exact year to place this story, because I went back and forth quite a bit as I was trying to figure out, what would work best for the historical elements and what was going on with the war and like the traveling in particular, because they leave London. And so trying to figure out all that was quite a challenge. And I had to, do some rewriting as I figured out what would make sense. But ultimately, I enjoyed it a lot.
Yes, I thought it came together really well. The elements of the war, there wasn't a whole lot. There was just enough that you really got a sense of setting. Then you didn't have to go into too many details before the family relocates to Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So, as one might guess from the title, flowers and gardening play a big part in the blossoming summer. Do you also enjoy gardening?
Yes, I love growing flowers, and I've been growing some specific cut flower varieties for about 8 years now. And so it was really a delight to be able to incorporate those details into the book and include some flowers that I've grown, like zinnias and black-eyed Susans, and have Rosemary and her grandmother be, planting those. And yeah, so I've been working in my garden over the last few weeks and planting some seeds, and like my cosmos, one of my very favorites, they're already coming up. So that's quite fun. And it's another reason why I'm happy that the book is coming out, in the summer, not only just because it makes sense for a book called The Blossoming Summer, but also just because, my garden, the flowers are going to be doing so well by then and, blooming. And so I just think that makes it fun.
Yes, it does. And the cover, too, is so summery and fun, and the colors are so pretty.
Yeah, thanks. I was really so thrilled to see that cover the first time.
So let's talk about your book, The Luminous Life of Lucy Landry. And Lucy is an orphan who goes to live with a large family running a lighthouse on Lake Superior. And Lucy reminded me so much of Anne of Green Gables with her big imagination and her dreams about life. Was Anne an inspiration for Lucy's character?
I get asked about this sometimes, and I would say that Anne wasn't really like on my mind as I created Lucy, as I was, first working on the character. I was really just trying to focus on what kind of character, I was most interested in writing about, and what kind of character would be the perfect one for this particular setting. And it made sense from a logical, plot standpoint to have a character with a big imagination and kind of a habit of getting into trouble, because that was, doubtlessly going to interfere with the lighthouse life. And so that was where I started from with Lucy. But as I kept writing, I did start noticing, these parallels to Anne, and I really enjoyed those, and I was pleased to have some of those Anne elements in the story. So yeah, it came to my mind the longer that I worked on it, and it really makes me happy that other people have seen that connection to it too. So yeah, I really like that.
That's good. That's lots of fun.
Yeah.
And then Lucy has a fear of water, yet she's fascinated by shipwrecks, and one shipwreck in particular. Did you enjoy researching and incorporating the history of Lake Superior's shipwrecks into the story?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Some of the details in Lucy's story were inspired by this wonderful book called The Historic Christmas Tree Ship. And it's the story of this ship from the 1910s that was unfortunately wrecked carrying Christmas trees. And there's so much information in that book about Great Lakes shipping and just ship stories in general and some legends. And it provided this really fascinating context that I was able to draw from. So that was kind of the starting point. And as I did more, in-depth research from there, particularly into lighthouses and stories of ships that were lost and also those that were saved, I just found it such interesting history. And when I initially came up with the idea for Lucy's story, it was because I had watched a webinar about women lighthouse keepers of the Great Lakes. And this was back in 2021. And I learned a lot from that webinar about what life would have been like for the children of lighthouse keepers. And so it was after that that I began doing brainstorming and researching for Lucy, and I went back to that Christmas Tree Ship book, which I initially had read for research while I was working on The Star That Always Stays. So yeah, it was just, I thought it was so fascinating to learn all about that.
Yes, and I like that too, how you were doing research for one book, but then it ended up coming over into another story. And I love that's the way how research works. It just, we get these stories and they stick in our brain, and then a little bit later we're like, oh, I know where I can put that in,
Yes, yeah.
So your debut, The Star That Always Stays, has a connection to your own family history. Can you tell the listeners who your heroine is based on?
Yes. I first got the idea for the book when I was doing some genealogy research about my great-grandmother, Norvia. And I figured out that the events that were happening in her life when she was about 14, she was starting high school while dealing with her parents' divorce, her mother's remarriage, and the beginning of World War I. So all these things that were happening at the same time started to make me think that I kind of had the pieces for a very compelling middle grade novel because of those coming of age elements. And so as soon as I got the idea for that, I just started writing it almost immediately. And so yeah, the main character in The Star That Always Stays is very much inspired by my great grandmother, and many of the characters in the book are inspired by her family members. And it was just such a fun process doing that. And not only just because, these were my, ancestors, and getting to learn more about them in the process was just very cool. But I've always been drawn to stories with characters who were inspired by real people. And so that made it just such a special project to work on. And yeah, after a lot of rewrites, that one was published in 2022. And yeah, it was just such a cool process. I remember it was funny that like I wrote some earlier drafts, and then I was able to, find out a little bit more about some of Norvia's family members, and I realized that, like things that I would write about them actually were, fairly accurate, and so that was very fun.
Yes. And then I think another reason that it's special too is that it went on to become, your first published novel, which is, it just makes it a little extra special too, to work on the characters, and it's your own family. And then it ended up being what brought you into the publishing world.
Yeah, absolutely. It was made it really special.
And I know there's much more to Norvia's story, than when she was just a teenager. So do you hope to write or publish it someday?
Yes, I have written more about Norvia and her family. There's actually a fair amount of follow-up material that I've written, but it's all just, very early draft stages, and the timing just isn't quite right for, publishing another book at the moment with those characters, but I definitely hope that in the future I can pursue that.
I would be very interested in learning more. And there was a little bit of a love story, kind of like a love triangle that was in there. And I think I know how it turns out, but I want to find out for sure.
Yes.
So, as someone who enjoys genealogy and family story research, do you have any more stories planned from your family tree?
I actually do have a few more stories in mind that are inspired by family history on a few different branches, but they just need a little bit more time to simmer in my mind before I can really commit to working on them. Right now, they're just very much ideas, and I've experimented with writing some of them, and I've done some different little drafts, but some stories just need more time, and they do.
Yes, I hear what you're saying there. I get that.
Yeah.
And so with your research, how far back can you trace your family?
Well, that sort of depends, because like when I was younger and I started genealogy and I was tracing back my family tree a very long way on a few different branches. But when I got older and I started doing, a little bit more in-depth research, I started to realize that a lot of genealogists just like copy info that they've seen on other people's family trees, and that doesn't always come from really solid research. And sometimes you find mistakes that kind of get passed from family tree to other family trees. So it's kind of hard to get back really far and be super confident in that research. You can kind of make some guesses or just see what other people are doing, but it's hard to know if it's really true or not. But I do have pretty solid research that I've done to get back quite a few branches to the 1700s. So I'm happy about that. That's been quite cool.
That is really cool. So The Star That Always Stays won the Christy Amplify Award, which is given to recognize and elevate underrepresented ethnic stories and their authors in Christian fiction. And this is a huge honor. How special is that award to you?
Yes, it was an incredibly special award. It was such a huge surprise, and it was so fun because I had enjoyed watching the Christy Awards live stream for several years, and so then to have The Star That Always Stays be chosen for that award was just so amazing. And yeah, it was this brand new award that was designed to recognize these underrepresented stories, and it just made my day that they felt Norvia's story was a good example of that. And yeah, I was so excited about that, and just so I felt very blessed that the book really resonated with the judges.
Yes, so Native American heritage has played a role in each of your stories, and you personally have that same Native American heritage. And has this played a role in your life as it has for your characters?
Yeah, it's really been a joy to get to write about characters who share my Ojibwe heritage. Yeah, I'm a member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, and it's been so cool to explore my heritage. I've been able to, learn a little bit of the language, some Anishinaabe, and I've loved getting to connect with it more. One thing that's been quite cool as I worked on my books was getting the chance to work with one of the language specialists at our tribe, and she's help to, make sure that I'm getting those Ojibwe language words correct. And that has just been an amazing experience. And it's also been wonderful to hear from some tribal members who have read my books, and I'm so happy that people are enjoying the books, and yeah, it's quite cool.
I listened to The Luminous Life of Lucy Landry. That was one that I first listened to on audio before I read it. And so that was fun too, to get to hear some of the words pronounced with the narrators.
Yes.
And because, sometimes if you're just reading it and you're not familiar with it, you just kind of like skip over it in your brain or whatever. But then especially then, because I did just finish reading The Blossoming Summer recently, since I had heard some of the words and even just like, the cadence or, how they stress different vowel sounds or whatever, I could understand it a lot more myself, having listened to that on audio and then reading this next one.
Yeah, that's great.
So your books have received quite a bit of attention and publicity, so I think I know the answer to this question. But do you believe there's a place out there for middle grade fiction with a vintage feel?
Yes, I definitely do. And I think that a lot of other people have been looking for books like these and really loving them. And there's a lot of readers who like those more old-fashioned stories for middle graders. And so they often, return to books from, early to mid 20th century like I do. But it's fun to have some new books coming out in that same style. That's always what I was on the lookout for, new books that reminded me of the old favorites. And I realized that that's what other people are looking for too a lot of the time. And so, yeah, it's really been so fun to see other readers coming to my books because they're looking for stories in that, Anne of Green Gables, Little Women, Betsy Tacy style. Yeah, that's been quite fun.
And you are always such an advocate in your blog posts and newsletters about classic middle grade authors and middle grade fiction. So I wanted to ask you if you could choose like 3 to recommend from like the classic middle grade authors. Who would you recommend to readers if they've enjoyed your stories, who they might check out?
Yeah, I think that if you enjoy my stories, then you would probably enjoy the books of Maud Hart Lovelace, Elizabeth Enright, and Noel Streatfeild. Their books are not exactly, like mine, but I think they share a lot of the same vibes. Like, they're very family focused, and they're, sometimes they're stories of, girls figuring out, the things they're interested in and starting to pursue their dreams, and also just some classic childhood adventures as well. So yeah, I'm always recommending books by those authors, and it's fun when, I'll like read some reviews of my books and people will say, that they're similar to some of these authors, and that always just makes my day because I was just so inspired by, their books. And yeah, it's so fun to have those kind of some parallels in the style of stories.
And you're a graduate of Author Conservatory. Can you tell us about this program and your experience with it?
Yes, so I graduated from the conservatory last year after 4 years in the program, and it was a wonderful experience. When I first became a student, I was kind of at a standstill with my writing, publishing journey, and my mentors, the main instructors, Brett Harris and Kara Swanson, they really helped me to put together a game plan for what direction to take with The Star That Always Stays. And I'm just forever grateful to them for that. And I actually got my first book deal not even a year into being in the program, but it continued to be so helpful to me to have that instruction and that one-on-one feedback because I still didn't have the greatest grasp on things like 3-act story structure and really strong character arcs, and they helped really solidify those concepts for me so much. And also one of the other instructors, Joanne Bischoff DeWitt, she really helped so much with Lucy and especially with The Blossoming Summer as I worked through the early phases of figuring out the plot. So yeah, she was really so helpful with Rosemary's story in particular. So I came away with just such amazing mentorship and a strong writing foundation and, great friendships. And it was really amazing.
That's good. And I have not had any experience personally with Author Conservatory, but hearing you talk about it, and then some other authors that I know, I have recommended it to like some of my students who are interested in writing. Have you checked out the Author Conservatory? Have you heard about it? So I think it is a wonderful program for any young writers who would be interested in having that kind of mentorship and training in the writing process.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of the writing process, like what is your favorite part of putting a story together?
My favorite part of the writing process would be, probably the brainstorming process, that like initial burst of excitement when you're inventing a new book and all the ideas are kind of, flowing into your mind, and, tiny things can spark new angles and elements. That is my favorite part. And I even set aside a few days in the spring now to do a little brainstorming retreat where I just try to, invent as many story ideas as I possibly can. And it's such a joy, because it's like once you get more into a story, you get further along and you're actually drafting, and, it's a little bit easier to lose motivation at that point, just because it's a big task once you're in the middle of it. But at the beginning, when it's all just brand new ideas and you're just having fun, that there's probably nothing better in the whole process than that. So I like that.
Yes. So in your stories, there's a faith thread that's light, but it's definitely there. And to me, it was clear, even in The Star That Always Stays, even the title that it refers to, and it's a reference to Jesus. And I love that. So why was including a faith theme important to you in your stories?
Yeah, I'm happy that you noticed that, because it meant a lot to me to make that connection. It was especially important for me to make faith an aspect of the story because, at its core, The Star That Always Stays is a coming-of-age story, and it's focused on, this girl who's trying to find her way and overcome a lot of challenges and obstacles in her life. And I wanted to show Norvia turning to her faith because I feel like it's not only, very real and relevant, but I find it powerful to be able to show young people that, it's truly the best thing that you can do. And that having that relationship with God can just, change so much. And so, it meant a lot to me to include that.
And then for you personally, is there a scripture that has been meaningful to you recently?
Yes. A while back, I put up a scripture verse above my desk, and I really love looking at it. And it's Psalm 96:12. Let the field be joyful and all that is in it. Then the trees of the woods will rejoice before the Lord. And it's a verse that makes me really happy, and I feel very peaceful when I read it. I love verses that talk about nature, and that's why I included one in the front of The Blossoming Summer. That one is Isaiah 58:11. Thou shalt be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters fail not. So those are really special to me.
I like that too. Those are really good. So you are also a gymnastics blogger, and how did you get started writing about this sport?
Yeah, I got started many years ago just because I enjoyed watching the competition so much, and so I started writing about gymnastics just, for myself, for fun. And then after a while I realized that, I wanted to share my writing with other people, and I had a blog I was reading, and I asked if I could help out with the blog, and the lady who ran it was just super kind, and she let me help her write some posts. And that was my first experience actually with people, reading my writing. And so it was such a cool experience. And then later that progressed to me, starting to write for the magazine Inside Gymnastics, and that was really amazing as well. So I've interviewed, hundreds and hundreds of athletes, and I interviewed, different Olympic champions even before they won gold. And so it's cool. And even though I've transitioned now to, focusing on writing my novels, I still have so much fun watching the competition. So it's very fun.
Oh, that's a great story. I'd never heard that before, that you just kind of asked if you could help out. I know sometimes that can be so intimidating that, to put yourself out there, but then you did, and it turned into a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. I'm glad I did.
So if readers would like to find out more about you or your stories, how can they connect with you?
Yes, so you can connect with me through my website, onrosejohnson.com, and my email list. I do a monthly email newsletter, so you can sign up for it on there. And also on my Instagram, which is Anna Rose Writer.
All right. Well, very good. I hope that they will go and find your stories.
Yes, I hope so too.
So listeners, that website once again to check out Anna's work is annarosejohnson.com. And I have enjoyed each and every one of her stories, and I look forward to what she'll be putting out in the future. And if you would also like to follow me and find out about my own author adventures on my quest for publication, you can follow me on Facebook or Instagram at author Erin Mifflin. And you can also visit my website at authorerinmifflin.com and sign up for my newsletter there. I would love to have you along for the journey. Until next time, happy reading!
Join us next week for another episode of The Well-Read Llama with your host, author Erin Mifflin. If you'd like to find out more about author Erin Mifflin, visit her Facebook and Instagram accounts.